All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very special episode of the Utah Stories program. We're trying to push the boundaries and do something brand new. So, Utah Stories is all about presenting the voice of local Utah in magazine form. We've been doing it for 12 years now. We have this podcast, and now we're doing live stream events on YouTube and Instagram. And we're really happy that you're joining us because this episode is all about you, the viewers, the watchers, people who are interested in the more important issues in Utah, the things that really affect the quality of our life, the things that will really determine and shape the Utah that we want to all have in the future. And I think now there's not a better time to actually get involved and understand the issues, to know what's happening, especially behind closed doors, especially things that you don't necessarily get from the mainstream media. And so we are presenting the last 6 episodes of the podcast, the comments that you have provided, because we are streaming live on YouTube and Instagram. You feel free to comment on the comments and on what we have been reporting on. The topics include public land policy, who our next governor is going to be. We're also going to be talking about how the lockdown has been continuing and the politicization of the COVID pandemic, and how they're telling certain groups you absolutely need to stay at home, you need to lock down your businesses, and other groups such as Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ demonstrations, feel free to come out, take your time in the park. Social distancing laws don't necessarily apply if you've got the right message. We're talking about a lot of things in current events, but we also go into public land policy and these issues that really affect our quality of life long term as well. So I hope you'll stay with us. It's going to be about 30 minutes, and it's all of your comments. So let's just dive right in. The first big debate we had online was actually on Instagram concerning the end of history video, the recent trend of tearing down statues of political figures we don't necessarily completely agree with, or we judge political figures by the measures that exist today, not in the context in which they lived in historical times. The biggest controversy was over this statue of Abraham Lincoln that they tore down on a campus in Portland. Protesters got a hold of it because it depicts a slave sort of in a lower position than Abraham Lincoln. A person on Instagram by the name of Hello Alexandra. I don't know that I know this person. I didn't check their account. But I think it's a woman, but she left a very interesting comment on the end of history and the tearing down of this Abraham Lincoln statue. She said, "No one is saying that we should forget the founding fathers lived. The bigger cry is to teach the full, complicated stories behind their actions and stop painting them as only heroes when at times they were pretty monstrous as well." Okay, I agree. We always tend to look at our historic figures in an unvarnished or a varnished way, not unvarnished, and we don't look at their problems, their bad characteristics. There's a lot of polarizing figures in history. Andrew Jackson is one. A lot of people are going to view him as a terrible monster. But Abraham Lincoln, it's hard to look at that guy and think, oh, yeah, he had a monstrous side to him. But so this was the problem, and this was the comment that brought 30 more comments on our Instagram account. Troy Pitts responded to Hello Alexandra by saying, "The Lincoln statue you referred to depicts a black man kneeling at Lincoln's feet in a very paternalistic manner. There are ways to capture this historic moment that show the strength and perseverance of black Americans. This statue is not one of those ways. No one is calling Lincoln a white supremacist." The thing about art, and good art especially, is that it's subjective. It's supposed to bring out an emotion in the viewer. Good art always will do that. This depiction, if, say, Lincoln and the slave were shaking hands, that would be, or they were eye to eye, that might be a less provocative image, right? That would be far more politically correct under our current standards. The slave could have been higher than Lincoln. Lincoln could have been looking up at the slave. And then that would have maybe evoked a completely different emotion. This statue, I found out, has been duplicated all over the country. It's in many, many different places. And I think what it shows when I look at it is releasing men out of bondage. And the slave is definitely at a far lower level than Abraham Lincoln, and it could appear paternalistic to some people, but he's showing the release of the chains by writing the famous document, the Emancipation Proclamation. So I think a lot of people like to look at that and think, oh, that's terribly racist or paternalistic. I don't see it that way, and there were a lot of comments how other people did not see it that way either. One comment was, have you seen this monument? That's a dumb argument. There's zero racism in this monument, but 100% unity and lifting the slave out of slavery. Do you see the chains on the slave's wrist? It's a historic monument. It represents the lifting of people from slavery. So it went back and forth and back and forth. I'm glad it kind of struck a chord. I like what we do on this program to be provocative, but again, art is subjective. Art that makes a point is always going to be somewhat controversial, and I don't think by any means should this statue then be eliminated all over the country. I don't think that makes sense at all, but feel free to comment. I appreciate well thought out comments. So in this same video, at the end of history, we pointed out how a city just outside of Dallas, an exurb of Dallas, they're basically addressing the issue of the area being a food desert, how there's very little economic opportunity, and a guy started a farm there, and he started hiring a lot of people who were of color, and black people and white people, providing jobs, and that brought up some interesting points, and this reader says that we bring up good points about black communities at the low end of the socioeconomic system. It needs to change. It's the why behind why they can't be traced back to Jim Crow and the rigged justice system to keep them there. People were not allowed to participate in the homesteading that took place in the United States. They were also excluded from being able to buy homes systemically. I just would need to see proof of that, and I would champion that cause. But we've pointed out before, there is not proof of systemic racism. You point to an institution or you point to some statistics, and I would agree with you. But just to say that black people can't buy homes and that's been proven, show me the statistics, show me the report, show me the study, and I could tend to agree with you. But it's blanket statements like that actually I don't think add much credence to the cause. So the comment goes on, and that comment's by Jacob Morale, and he also talks about affordable housing and how just changing zoning laws to allow for smaller homes in urban areas could definitely open up ownership to more black people and more economic opportunity. And that's the point I wanted to make, and we did make in that. And one of the ways that communities end up being destroyed is simply by everybody always buying from the chain stores. And then we point out how by buying from locally owned grocery stores, by buying your lunch, if you're going to go out to lunch from a locally owned restaurant, you're going to support the fabric of the community. And Jacob also supports that as well. So let's move on to the next video. This video we titled Hypocrisy in Action. I'll show a little clip from that now.
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot!
Talk about the world that you want for your son, the changes you want to see.
I want the racism to stop. Like, I don't want to have to be able to tell my son, be careful of what you say. Don't wear this.
So
Don't look at people
those of you
a
on
certain kind
Instagram,
of
we're
way.
showing a clip of
I
Liberty
don't want my
Park
son to experience what I
jam-packed full of people
experienced.
Racism.
because Black
Okay,
Lives
as you
Matter teamed up with our Pride Month. It was Pride Month all the month of June, and the whole park was jam-packed. Just thousands of people came out because it was the thing to do and to celebrate gay pride and also Black Lives Matter. And the problem I have with this is not that those protests, those demonstrations happen. That's great. Pride Month is awesome. Everybody loves it. Black Lives Matter. We definitely agree on this program. The problem I have is the double standard. We put on festivals. That's part of how we make a living. We're not allowed to have a festival that looks exactly like that demonstration. We as a company are prohibited by the laws under coronavirus right now in the pandemic to do anything like what they are doing. But because our city likes their message, that it likes the fact that they're demonstrating solidarity for causes that are very popular, they're allowed to do it, but we are not. So, and all the best festivals in Utah have all been canceled. I think it should all the rules should apply the same to everybody. I don't believe there should be a double standard. If they like your cause, they will give you a permit. If they think you're just for being able to sell products for local businesses or product makers or support product makers in Utah through our Made in Utah Festival, that doesn't work because you need to apply by this set of rules. I always like to point out double standards when they exist, and that's just not fair, and it should not happen. So what they need to do is just allow people to congregate, to join together, to have festivals. We're humans. We want to join. We want to have festivals. We want to have concerts. And this comment was, sure, a lot of hypocrisy is going on right now. COVID is pretty much a part of life now, said Tony Hardman 2 weeks ago. So, and then we bring on the program somebody a little bit later, who I'm going to get to in a minute, Eric Mustos, who started putting on demonstrations and concerts, trying to defy or push the rules and the boundaries of the rules with what he was trying to do. So the next clip I want to show you is on public land policy from Phil Lyman. Phil Lyman is a pretty controversial figure in Utah. He is he serves in the Utah House for San Juan County, and he's an advocate for state control over public lands. And the reason I had him on the program is not necessarily I agree with everything he had to say, but because there's this huge chasm that exists between those on the right who want open, free access to public lands completely for RVs, for UTVs, for trails and everything, and those on the left who want BLM to have stricter controls, tighter conditions, where they wanted the expansion of Bears Ears. Bears Ears came to the forefront of the whole public debate over it. And Phil Lyman now is going to talk about his point, why those two sides cannot come together.
They just have an agenda, and it's wilderness. And it's not wilderness for the sake of preservation. It's wilderness for the sake of a legacy for a person like Dennis Sizemore. He said, I want 10 million acres of wilderness basically to my name. And he doesn't care where it is or how he gets it.
What
and that's
Phil
the
Lyman is
ideology
saying,
that
for
breaks
those of you
down
on
relationships.
Instagram,
Like, we're not having a discussion anymore about what makes sense to protect. We're dealing with a person's ego, a person's ideology, and
is
and
it
that's
the
what I
ideal?
find
The
on
reason
left
why it's become
to
so
an
ideological,
alarming extent
and you could stop the clip now, Tyler, is because it becomes an argument of wilderness just for the sake of wilderness, not because they want to open up the land for more use. It becomes more about the Phil Lyman points out a man by the name of Dan Love. Dan Love's ego wants to win a victory for the sake of wilderness so he can go down as being this wonderful advocate for wilderness without any consideration of the people who actually live in rural communities and have to make a living on the land and have to run businesses and need access to trails and access to land to be able to run their businesses. And so I find that debate very fascinating because I sit right in the middle of both camps. But what I also find is that because I happen to be open to the other side, listening to the other side, I get labeled as something like a right-wing neocon, anti-environmentalist, whatever. But of course, I love the environment. I spend all my free time in the wilderness and the mountains. But I know that people in rural Utah, I've listened to them, I've written stories about them for 10 years, and they absolutely need a means to make a living. And if we just cut off their access to lands and they can't make a living any longer because we want more wilderness, we're doing a huge disservice to all of Utah. And we're doing a huge disservice actually to the landholders in these rural areas who want to figure out a way to eke out a living. It's really difficult to make a living in those places. And so I got a big, long comment. I'm just going to read a part of it that he said, Lyman was doing very well till he said, I love living in public land state and having wide open space. Lyman and everyone else, including the Birkenstock crowd and Sugar House, need to realize that those scenic areas will still exist without the government. History has proven it so. This is just another example that Lyman still needs to expand his constitutional thinking. Then a big long link. Those people will no longer speak to you because you said locals need to make a living. These are mostly city dwellers, the kind who visit public land and leave their garbage for others to pick up. The overcrowding of cities is the agenda. Hashtag Agenda 21. But the COVID crisis and riots are testimony to the fact that the cities are the worst places to be. Points out something to the Taylor Grazing Act that's made it more and more difficult for rural people to live. I don't know much about Agenda 21. Maybe somebody, I'll follow some of these links. I've heard about it, that it's this United Nations agenda to basically ruin our country. That there's a big conspiracy behind why our cities are so populated. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole, so I can't speak to that. But I thought I'd share the comment because it's the person took the time to write this long comment, and I appreciate that. So if you have any comment on Agenda 21 that I don't know about, feel free to chime in. But I'll follow these, and if it's interesting enough, maybe we'll do a Rich's Rabbit Hole segment on it. Okay, so now we're going to move to our interview with Greg Hughes, gubernatorial candidate. He was on the program a couple weeks ago. That really shook up the hornet's nest when he came on, because I guess he's such a controversial figure, and I stand very firmly against cronyism and crony capitalism, and I see him as being right in the center. If anybody understands what cronyism looks like and how it operates in Utah, it's Greg Hughes, and Greg Hughes knows all about the Good Old Boys Club, and my buddy Eric Peterson did an investigative journalism piece on him and how he received a huge loan when he needed it from Terry Deal. It's a long, drawn-out story, but anyway, a whole bunch of good old boys who are developers. They also sit in the Utah State legislature, and they basically fast-track their projects. They have tons of development projects they're working on, and there's no doubt that there's a lot of cronyism that exists. So I'm going to show you this clip from Greg Hughes talking about cronyism, and you can hear his response.
I spearheaded the move of the prison.
About the prison move.
And that really came when I
the
was the
move of
majority
the
whip.
prison.
We were in a session, and some gentlemen sat down with
Can you
me
make
and
that a
said,
little
"Hey, we've
louder?"
got an idea to move the prison. We want to move the prison somewhere else, and we're looking to lease the state land and not have the state sell it. But then we can put so much more density on that land if it's not a land that's in the jurisdiction of Draper City, which Draper is the city that I represent." The plan that they were rolling out to me sounded absolutely terrible for my city and the tax base and everything else. And I filed the bill that year of the Prison Relocation and Development Authority, and that
So
President Niederhauser
what
wasn't
we
involved
will
with the
go
gentleman that met with
into
me in my
is
office,
how
who were looking for my
somebody's
support for
saying
their idea.
volume. I hope you can hear me.
But that bill that I
What
read,
we will go into is how the fast tracking of the prison didn't benefit Utahns. It benefited developers and politicians because the prison didn't need to move anywhere. The prison wasn't overpopulated. There was no reason to move the prison other than developers and politicians had their eyes set on what was, I believe, 220 acres that could be such a better, higher use of gaining tax revenue in. And its moving to the northwest quadrant only proved to be extremely problematic because of mosquito abatement, the environmental costs to this huge wetland area where they had to build this massive facility. It's been an absolute disaster. Greg Hughes spearheaded that program. He moved the prison. He takes credit for that, but he says the reason why he did that is he had a much better vision than what they were planning on in the future. I don't know the details, but that the Senate president owned land all around the old prison site, and he spearheaded, along with Hughes, the moving of that prison. I don't like that kind of deal. I don't like seeing that. You shouldn't personally benefit as a politician developer from changing policy to benefit your special interests. And I'm afraid he didn't lose, and he lost in the primary. But I was really happy to see that Greg Hughes actually came on the program and answered all the tough questions. So a lot of people had negative comments towards Greg Hughes. Somebody's left a really nice comment. They said, I've always enjoyed the stories whenever I see them in restaurants, but had no idea there was a YouTube. I see you being a Sean Hannity twin. Truly enjoyed this, Greg Hughes, and tough questions. We've already voted for Greg and Victor, truly wanting those two to win. I've also subscribed so I can get notified of your videos. Thank you. Greg truly shined in this interview. I asked him a lot of tough questions. I think he did a pretty good job too, but a lot of people don't like him because everybody on the left sees the cronyism problems. Paul said, just like Mitt Romney, John Huntsman wants local office for personal reasons completely unrelated to the best interest of true Utahns. Therefore, the question is, who can beat Huntsman? I guess I'm voting Cox just because he has the best chance of canceling another Mr. Big trying to sucker the local yokel. And Cox won, so hopefully he will be a good candidate. I mean, he's more than likely going to win, as the GOP candidate for governor has won, I think, the last 100 years. So, all right. So we will now get to the examination of Ben Shapiro protests at the University of Utah and white privilege and institutional racism. Before we get to that, I need to tell you about one of our sponsors. The lakes are open. Get out and rent a jet ski from Action Toy Rental this summer. Rent 2 jet skis for $277 per day. Take your friends and family out to the lake and enjoy a set of Yamaha jet skis that can pull someone on a tube, wakeboard, or water skis. Book them online with coupon code UT2020 to save $40. So go out to the lake, and you can rent these amazing giant jet skis. They'll pull you on a tube. They're super powerful. If you haven't tried the new style of jet skis, it's incredible how fast they are. All right. So let's go on with the Ben Shapiro institutional racism video and the comment that I received there.
Black Lives Matter! 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 Black Lives Matter!
I'm doing a
Matter supporters
speech in my public speaking class about white privilege and why it's a myth.
And we're
And
now watching
when I brought up
Ben
this topic in
Shapiro's
class,
answer
everybody
to does
just
institutional racism
and they said
exist?
you can't talk about it because you're
exist?
white.
And why do you have
it's,
a right to
how do
speak
you
about it as a
respond to
white
that?
man?
And
I mean, the first thing I would say is check your privilege. Right? I mean, why don't I get to say it because I'm white? Are you a racist? Is the argument
So
less
Ben's
valid
saying,
because I'm white?
why
Why
don't I
argue
get
with the
to
argument as opposed to
respond to
arguing
this
with the color
because
of my
I'm
skin?
white?
It seems a little
Does
bit
that make
racially
you a
discriminatory
racist?
that you're not allowed to speak based on the color of your skin. Either the argument is good or the argument is bad. How about this? How about if I get a black friend to come in and I hand them the text of my speech and she reads it? Then is it a better argument?
So the point is that institutional racism or racism exists to such a degree that you as a white person are unable to comment on these things because you need to check your privilege and you need to check your whiteness. You don't have any right to speak about these things. And Ben says an argument should be an argument no matter who says it. And if there's an argument against a certain thing, a person of any race, creed, or color should be able to comment on that thing. I happen to agree with him. I think anybody should be able to speak about anything, especially in a healthy public discourse. We shouldn't be so politically correct that you can only speak about the racial or ethnic identity that you espouse to. So this comment was interesting. This person says, I disagree with Ben on 3 things in today's society. High school and most college degrees can keep you in poorhouses. Kids or no kids, we live in a country where if you are not financially educated, like Kiyosaki or a medical doctor who is being pimped out by the drug companies, you are a low middle class or poor, pretty much in most cases. That was a comment. I don't have the name of the person, but it was just barely left before I started this. We have about 8,000 comments on this one video. So I'll unpack this a little bit. To say that you can only make it in this country if you are not financially educated is absolutely correct. But to say you can only make it in this country if you are a doctor or a lawyer is absolutely incorrect. So they're saying something that is correct. I believe so many people in our country are financially illiterate. They know nothing about economics. They know nothing about building wealth. They know nothing about how our tax structure works, and they become victims of our tax structure and the way the corporate structure of our society has been built. And to compare wages to wealth and to understand the difference between the two is the beginning of financial education. It's where everybody actually needs to start to learn something. So he disagrees that people are left out of the system because if we are middle class or if we are poor, we are pretty much left behind. No, I think you can absolutely climb the ladder, the socioeconomic ladder, if you learn about true skills and building your own skill set and providing true value to the marketplace. Anybody who does that, anybody who adds value to the marketplace will be rewarded. And as long as you protect your income from being plundered by the government and you learn how to build wealth, you can climb the economic ladder. It's more difficult, but you can still do it. So, all right. The last clip I'm going to show you now is from the interview we had with Eric Mustos. Mutsos, he was the man who I mentioned earlier, defied all the laws and decided to put on a country music concert despite the fact that we live in a pandemic society with lockdowns. He found a way to put on a country music concert with Colin Ray. He had to skip from 3 different counties to make it happen. I had him on the program to talk about it. Here's a little clip of how he did that.
It was just a battle to finally get this Colin Ray concert off the ground, and we finally made it happen in Iron County, Cedar City.
So I really applaud this guy because
it actually
as we pointed out earlier, the laws
good to hear.
don't
I didn't
make
see.
any sense.
I was
There's a
following all
complete
the
double
Tribune
standard
newspaper
if
stories
you
about it,
are all about,
and it seemed to just fall off after the.
Of course.
After the riot happened the same day.
They don't want to report that, but we had over 5,000 people show up in Cedar City, and we had the first concert
So I
since COVID.
commented
And
out
was-
to
it
him
was an
how
amazing
the
event. We had
Deseret News stopped
right around
reporting on it
100
after he
booths show up from
successfully,
all over the state of Utah.
or not Deseret News, the
Oh,
Salt Lake
that's so
Tribune
great.
stopped reporting on
And
it
so that's
after
what
he
we've been doing.
successfully
So now we're getting ready to do our
pulled
4th
off
of
his
July event.
concert. They
That's
were
so
really
great.
following the story. I was really intrigued by the story, and then I didn't see anything after he was denied access to put on the concert in Tooele County, and I thought that was the end of it. I thought he had to give up, but it turned out Cedar City allowed him to put his concert on. He had 5,000 people show up. He had 100 vendors. That's what I find so cool. He was able to bring all these local business vendors to his concert in Tooele County, or not Tooele, Cedar City, which is Iron County, I believe, and he pulled it off. So quite a feat there, because what I don't like is if you are Costco or Target, you can have 1,000 people in one place. But if you're trying to put on a concert, or you're trying to have a farmer's market or a Made in Utah festival, you absolutely can't do that. That's not possible under the current law, unless you are holding a Black Lives Matter demonstration. So he did it. He just had to move all the way to near southern Utah into a more remote county. And I think it's great, because I think all those thousands and thousands of people who were in Liberty Park on that weekend, their susceptibility to COVID is just as great as concert goers who are actually spacing out 6 feet and practicing all the best social distancing rules. And so with that said, I really appreciate all of your comments. I appreciate all you who are watching and part of this community. I think the voice of local Utah is now more important than ever. The voices get drowned out, unfortunately, in the current media cycle. If you watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or any of this, they try to dominate and take over the conversation. There's a much more important conversation happening at a local level. You just got to turn off the TV and tune in to local journalism, Deseret News, Salt Lake Tribune, City Weekly, Catalyst. I appreciate what all of my fellow publishers are doing out there, and I think we need to tune in to local to save our communities, especially at this time when so many local businesses are in jeopardy due to the lockdown measures. And we work a lot with local restaurants, and a lot of them are struggling, and I really hope we don't lose a ton of them. So have to plug our current issue. It's only going to be out a couple more weeks till our next one comes out. It's Heavy Meds. It's all about psychedelics, mushrooms, and medication you can take that is not owned by Big Pharma to overcome all sorts of problems, illnesses, and not have to carry around this heavy burden of heavy medication. So go pick that up. We're at all the associated food stores along the Wasatch Front, as well as 500 more locations along the Wasatch Front. If you want to know where to find it, just give me an email, shout out. A lot of people commented they didn't know where to find it. Just email me, richard@utahstories.com, with where you live in the subject line. I'll tell you the closest location where you can pick up a copy of our current issue. Also, go out and subscribe to utahstories.com to our newsletter to get all the latest updates on what we're covering. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're getting a lot more YouTube subscribers, which is interesting. I didn't expect that. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud with the podcast. And keep the comments coming. We'll probably continue this if this does okay, and would love to hear more from you. All right, with that, our booking managers, Connie Lewis, our technical producers, Tyler Bond, and Golda Hukic Markosian is our digital publisher. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.